Acknowledgement is basically a notification for the message broker that a particular message has been processed and the broker does not need to worry about it anymore. In particular, it shouldn't redeliver the message to this or some other consumer. With the acknowledgement mechanism, we can ensure that a message is not lost in case of a service failure or message processing error. We can also guarantee data consistency among different services. By default, RabbitMQ Transporter automatically acknowledges messages after they are received by the consumer service. However, in some cases, we might want to manually acknowledge messages. Let's take a closer look and show how all of this works in practice. Let's open up the Notification Service Controller file and update the Send Notification method to always throw an error to simulate a message processing error. In a real-world system, this could happen if an email server is down, just as an example. We also have to re-enable the Alarms Generator service, so let's open up the Alarms Generator service file and uncomment the interval decorator. Now, next up, we need to migrate the notification service to RabbitMQ. Let's first open up our Docker Compose YAML file and update the notification service to depend on the RabbitMQ service. Next, declare the RabbitMQ_URL environment variable so that the notification service can connect to the RabbitMQ server. Similarly, let's also do the same for the alarms service. With all of this in place, let's navigate to the notification service application and open up the main.ts file to update the connect microservice method to use the RabbitMQ transport strategy. Lastly, we also have to update the alarms service application, which is our orchestrator, to use the RabbitMQ client when sending events to the notifications service. So, let's open up our constants.ts file and first rename the existing constant to nats_message_broker. Next, let's declare a new constant called notifications_service right after the nats message broker constant. With that in place, let's open up our alarms service module file and update the client's module configuration to register two clients, one for the nats transport strategy and another for the RabbitMQ transport strategy, specifically for the notifications service. Great! Now with the client provider registered, let's open up the alarm service controller file and inject the notification service client with the inject decorator. Just for purity's sake, let's also rename the message broker property here to nats message broker so we can distinguish between the two. And last but not least, let's scroll down to the create method and update the code to use the notification service client instead of the message broker client for sending notifications. Let's save our changes, head over to the terminal, and make sure everything is up and running. As we can see from the logs, the failed to send notification error was logged down to our console. However, the message was not redelivered to the consumer service. This is because the RabbitMQ transport strategy, as we mentioned earlier, automatically acknowledges messages after delivering them to the consumer service. So, how can we manually acknowledge messages? Well, we can do this by first turning off the auto acknowledgement feature and then manually acknowledging messages using the channel ACK method. So, let's open up our main.ts file in the notification service application and update the connect microservice method, setting the no ACK attribute to false. With this change in place, now the message broker will not automatically acknowledge messages. To test it out, let's switch over to our terminal again and observe those logs. So it seems that our messages are still not immediately redelivered to the consumer service. But why is that? Well, in RabbitMQ, non-acknowledged messages are not deleted from the queue and are redelivered to the consumer service when the consumer service restarts, which means that in order to see messages being redelivered to the notification service, we need to restart it. To trigger a restart, let's simply update the notification service controller file and save it. Let's switch over to the terminal again and observe those logs. And as we can see from the logs here, several previously non-acknowledged messages were redelivered to the service. Great. But what if we wanted messages to be redelivered immediately instead of waiting for the service to restart? Well, we can do this by using the channel NAC method. For this, we need to inject the RMQ context using the CTX param decorator as follows. And then, inside of the sendNotification method, we can use the channel NAC method to reject the message. To avoid entering an infinite loop, we'll also check to see if the message was already redelivered. If so, we'll acknowledge the message and discard it. So let's save our changes and head over to the terminal and observe those logs once more. And as we can see, the message was immediately redelivered to the consumer service after it was rejected and eventually acknowledged and discarded. Excellent. So to summarize, in this lesson we learned how to manually acknowledge messages using the channel ACK and channel NAC methods. We also learned that in RabbitMQ, non-acknowledged messages are not deleted from the queue and are redelivered to the consumer service when the consumer service restarts.